It's going. If I'm looking at the side of the Macintosh, I'll notice too, this is at an angle. The front face is not vertical. The rear face is, but the front face is not vertical. It kicks back probably, I don't know, 5, 7 degrees. It's not terribly strong, but it's there. And the top is the same way. It actually is perpendicular to that front face. So this is something we're going to have to watch and make sure that we lean that face back a little bit. You can also see how the keyboard kind of works there too, that thick chunk. We don't need to draw all the keys. We want to draw the boundary of the keys and kind of indicate where the keys are, but not necessarily get hung up in trying to draw each key. That's one of the important things. So let's start this. I'm just going to kind of kick off this like I would most of these other drawings. See if I can back out a little bit where you can see the whole thing. And that is, again, using your Prismacolor very, very lightly. I mean, this is in that 5 to 10% zone, right? Just to let you know, I did the entire two drawings with hard lines, okay? This was from the first session, and I started the next drawing. I never sharpened my pencil, not once, and I actually never used, I have two pencils here. I only used one end of one pencil, and I never sharpened it. So I don't want to hear anything about, oh, I got to sharpen so many of these Prismacolors. Actually, no. You can do drawing after drawing after drawing with one Prismacolor if you're drawing lightly and you're going easy with it, and then you build in the darks as you go. So it's all about technique and trying to do that. So I'm going to start out. You can see mine's not super sharp, but it's got just enough on it to where I can lean it over and kind of find edges to kind of create finer lines with. So let's start. You know, let me show you this drawing first, just because this is where I started out last time, and I don't know where my drawing's going to go. I start something and I don't always like it. Couple of things that got me on this drawing. I ended up, though I started out thinking I was going to be looking down on this, I ended up with the horizon line that cut right through the middle of the screen. This essentially created the architectural look of the Mac, right? So it looks like a building a little bit, which is okay. It adds some drama, but it really probably isn't the best way to look at this. And I'm actually going to try to draw it a little differently with you guys, looking a little bit more down on it. But one of the dynamics that came out of this drawing real quickly was that because the computer is set back and the keyboard and mouse are closer, it actually amplifies the scale a little bit. It's already a thick mouse and a thick keyboard, and then when you show it this particular perspective, it makes it look even bigger than it should be. And so it's a little wonky, right? It's not quite, oh, there's a line I don't like. I'm just going to fix that. So, you know, there's some wonkiness here. I'm going to try to avoid that. But let's see what we can do kind of from a little bit more of a top-down perspective. One of the challenges here is fitting everything on the page. This is a small, by my standards, this is a little bit too small a piece of paper to draw this with a Prismacolor. I would rather be in pen and ink probably at this scale, just because it's getting kind of dense. But for the sake of being a standardized piece of paper, we're going to stick with the small scale here, and I'm going to do just exactly what we did, how we start out with a forward V, and I'm going to aim this thing a little bit. I typically go kind of, how shall we say, a little bit even with my perspectives. I'm going to lean this one a little bit more towards where it's facing. So I'm going to make this facing left. The computer's screen will be facing this way, and keyboard would be zoned right over in here, and the mouse is going to be somewhere over in here. The challenge is making sure you can fit. I usually like to start my forward corner on the corner of the computer box and not on the keyboard. And so you have to leave enough room on your paper to grow your keyboard forward and to grow the mouse forward. That ends up being the challenge. So these first two lines I drew, I'm going to back off of that just a little bit because I need room for a keyboard. And so I'm going to come in here and draw a second set. Let's just go with that. I started out doing this the first time and it didn't. I ended up playing with it, and I ended up with a with a little bit more of a horizon line through the middle. This time I'm going to try to do that a little differently. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of manage a height here. It's okay, by the way, if your keyboard runs a little bit off the page. I'm not actually that concerned with if you get it all on the page or not. It's more, is the perspective correct? Are the proportions correct? But it is kind of important to try to lay it out as best you can to get it on the page early. Let's see if I can get that there. And I'm setting kind of an initial height, maybe just a little higher right there. And I'm going to make this real shallow. This is going to be real close to the horizon line. But those two are converging. I don't know if you can see that. Almost can't. But those two are converging. And I'm going to do the same thing this direction. And send that off that direction. Can y'all see those lines okay? They're fairly light, but they're converging. And I am slightly looking down on this. Okay? But I can tell you already the keyboard, I'm probably going to see about 2/3 of this keyboard before it blows off to the left. I'm just not going to see it all because this is the front corner of that computer. And I'm sitting here really worried about the mouse. I'll have to really work that mouse in here. Okay. So pretty easy to get a front corner. The battle I'm fighting here is just getting it on the whole, getting the whole thing on the page. Yes.
I was wondering if you could just make your projection lines a little bit darker. They're kind of hard to see.
Okay, I'll darken them up a little bit. You don't. How about that? Keep yours light. I'll darken mine up for you to see. Here's my front corner. Those bottom two were mistakes. I've left those alone. So now I've got to measure, kind of estimate my width to height. I've already said that my base is essentially a square, that the lower footprint of this thing is a square. So that's nice. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of estimate the base as a square first. And let's just say if I make it about that deep, striking back, then I need to come over here and make this a square. And all I tend to do is come out here and kind of measure. I like to put a little tick mark and sight myself and see where that goes. And then here, you'll notice I'm not using triangle at all right now. Not yet. What dictates when you use a triangle and when you don't? It's kind of personal preference. For me, it has to do with when I think I can tighten something up, I'll use it. Or if I just can't hit straight lines freehand, sometimes I'll use it to draw constructions. But I'm feeling it right now. I'm going to stick with my freehand constructions. So if I get this, everybody see those okay? That's pretty much my square unit. I'm going to go ahead and draw my vertical here. And draw my vertical back here. If I can get it vertical. And across the top. This is going to be real shallow. These to me are the hardest ones to get right because they're still converging, but golly, it's hard to see them. And this one's cutting way across, coming through that midpoint. So this isn't a cube, but man, it's looking like a cube. It should be taller than a cube. And now I'm second guessing it because I'm thinking, you know what? I need a little more height relative to the cube than that. You know, if I'm looking at kind of this, how much taller do you think this is than a cube? You know, if I was to take this dimension, front to back, and rotate it up, well, it's not far off. But it feels like it ought to be a little bit taller than a cube, right? So the footprint's a square, but it needs to be a little tall. Maybe it is a little tall. I think it is slight. I think my sketch is a little taller than a cube, but I'm gonna take a little more out of it right now, just to ensure. So I'm gonna adjust the width, and I like to do that first on the verticals. So my new width drops down to right about here, cuts across. And again, if you're doing this lightly, it's not gonna matter. That cuts across. And then I'm going to do it over on this end and shave a little off that end too, just to make sure I have verticality here, because I don't feel like I did at first. I don't have it on that back edge. There we go. Now the other time that I kind of darken lines a little bit sometimes is to clarify, because I might get a little fuzzy. It's getting a little shadowy back in here and hard to remember which line's the right line. So sometimes I'll come in and darken a line a little bit. Okay, I'm feeling better about the proportions of that. I think that's closer to being a vertical, more of a vertically oriented cube. See if I can see the side view of it. Yeah, here's kind of where I was estimating. So if I was drawing a cube based off of this, the cube's going to be somewhere in here. That would be a cube. So this extra amount that is the top ends up being like 25% more or something like that. That's probably close. It might even be a little taller than what I've drawn still, but I'm going to go with it, and we'll start that off. You know, before I get too much further, I might even go ahead and mock up where my keyboard is going to go. So because this is right justified, I'm going to just extend this line forward. This will be the boundary of the keyboard. And if I look at the relative thickness of it and kind of how this is done, what I want to do is kind of just draw a box that bounds the front and the back of that. And it looks like that keyboard's about half the depth, roughly half the depth of the computer itself. So if this is half of the computer, you know, I could probably come out, there's going to be a gap there because it sits forward. So give it a gap out here. Probably keyboard corners something like this on that line. Everybody following me? I'm estimating.
Would you scoot your paper up
Oh, I'm
just a
sorry.
little bit?
Yep.
Sorry.
So I'm just estimating along this line kind of where that keyboard boundary is going to be, and thinking about kind of the footprints of this. Let me go in and draw the back side of that and make sure I'm seeing. Okay. And I'll go ahead and put those vanishing lines in perspective so that I can, the rest of my drawing, I'm going to be seeing that keyboard kind of front, or that right-hand side of it right about somewhere in here. And I'll come back to that. But I'm ready to get on to some computer here. So first thing I'm going to do, I like this side right here to draw it over on this face. Why? I don't know. It's a fairly simple shape, but I know I need this angle and the top angle. I know there's a chamfer on the back. See that chamfer right there? There's a chamfer off that rear corner. There's this nice little step in. To me, that's actually the sweet spot of the product, is kind of this little toe kick that you get. It's almost like a cabinet. Underneath your cabinets, there's that little area that almost is begging for the keyboard to nest up under, even though it doesn't. These sorts of things. So I'm gonna draw this side view. I'm gonna just estimate height up this vertical relative to that. So, you know, how high should this point be up that leg? As I got one, I'm just gonna estimate there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of those heights. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, 6 of those heights. I'm not going to measure them all out, but I can kind of sense that maybe right in here becomes the height of where this point is going to be. And that gives me a lot. That point drives a lot. It drives the whole front end of this because that becomes the lip, the front lip that all of this hangs off of. And I can come back and really, to be honest, I can kind of estimate this. That vertical leg, the foot really for this, is right there. And why did it finish right there and not an inch deeper? Well, I'm estimating. I'm kind of could have gone a little deeper maybe, but somewhere right in there. And I know that this is an angle kicking back. How far back should I go? I'm going to estimate it. I can kind of look and see it's not that dramatic. But if I step back a distance on that line and put me a little tick mark there, it gives me something to cite to such that I can just connect those dots. And there's my angle. Now before I go too much further, I need to replicate that angle on the other side. Now, construction method would be to strike a line to that vanishing point from there, and where that crosses your rear line,
Just
that,
bring your paper down a little bit.
where that crosses your rear line would be that boundary. But I got a lot of mud going on back here, and it's kind of hard to tell exactly where that needs to be. So I'm just going to do my best to keep it in perspective, to keep that line going to that vanishing point, and try my best to kind of figure out where that lands back there. I'm going to darken it just a little bit where you can kind of see it. And it stands to reason that this angle is going to look more angled on that rear face than it did on this front face, because that face is opening up to that end of the drawing. So that gives me my second point to do an angle with. Now I've got my angled face. I don't have my angled top yet, and this I'm going to estimate as well. I'm just going to come off the back at a slight angle, very similar to what I did to the front, and it's going to drop down a little bit. And you can go on and extend it to that back corner if you want, but you also have a chamfer that starts on this rear corner. And again, I'm just eyeballing, but I'm looking at kind of this side view. I don't know if y'all can see, it's fairly light lines that are drawn on there, but I'm just kind of sketching over that, and that's helping me sight. So yeah, if we want to rotate this way and look at it, that's kind of what you're trying to do. All right, back is vertical. So I already have that line done. That'll be a final line on the drawing right there. And then it comes forward, down low, just like what we have. The other line that I don't yet have is the foot right here, the starting point of the foot, but that's easy. You're just extending from that point over to the rear line and then sending that up. And it actually ends up kind of nestling up underneath. You don't actually see that curvature so much right there. Does that make sense? Pretty easy. Fun, actually. Now, here's one of the tricks here, and we're going to see if this works. This is where I am going to use my triangle, only because of how precise this kind of needs to be to see if I can hit it. Because this is angled down, because this plane is not horizontal, and it's tilted back, and because of how shallow I am on the horizon line here, I'm just gonna see if I can even see the top here, and it looks like I will just barely be able to see it. I didn't want to freehand this because I just wanted to. I'm gonna take this corner and shoot it across where it's bisecting those vanishing lines, and then I'm gonna do the same by replicating this angle, that's the angled top right here, but taking that angle from this front tip and dropping it back. And it actually ought to come, technically, it ought to finish out just forward of that rear corner, if that rear corner is still accurate. Let's see. Nope, I've got the wrong rear corner. My new rear corner is actually right in here. So actually right there, sorry. So this is going to be coming, that point comes just a little forward of the rear corner.
Here's a question.
Yes.
The top part of the computer that you drew, is that at an angle before you drew that back? Does that make sense?
Yes, this is at an angle. The actual original perspective line is right here.
Okay.
If this was going to be a flat-topped computer, it would have followed that line. And I have dropped this corner rearward and put a rear chamfer right there as well. And this is what I'm getting at, is in order to see if I'm still going to even see any of the top, it's not clear when I start out. I actually am projecting that rear corner of that chamfer all the way back over to this back side and dropping that down. And you'll see, yeah, I am seeing just a small little bit of that top. It's going to be a little sliver. You'll notice that didn't happen on this drawing. This drawing, the horizon line went right through the screen. It was not above the computer. And so I ended up not seeing any of the top. The top is in fact above and completely out of view. So we're drawing this one a bit differently. And I think a little bit better viewpoint, because I'm seeing more this way, right? I'm actually seeing a little bit more of the shape by looking down slightly upon it. Okay, so I now have pretty close, I think the proportion's pretty close on my box. There is a handle, by the way, that is technically going to show up. It's not going to show up much, and I think I'm not going to put it in yet just because it's a detail. I'm just going to cap the back right here such that I've got something that looks pretty close to my volume. I'm going to come forward to my keyboard. Before I get in too much on my screen and all the fun chamfering and stuff, let's draw a little on the keyboard, because I think we need to make sure that's kind of set up right. And you notice here I had set up originally these lines to kind of show me where the volume would be, and they come forward right here, and I drew that one wrong. Let me try that again. How tall does this keyboard come up? Well, the full block, if I was not looking at the diagonal here, but just the block of this, ends up being pretty close to the height, maybe even higher than the height of that little step forward. So if I was to bring that line of that toe kick forward, wow, look how thick that's going to be. That really looks really thick. It is thick. But we're going to be lopping off the corners with chamfers. We're going to be doing this at an angle. There's a lot of mass that will be taken out of this block that we don't have currently out of it. So it tends to look thicker than it maybe is. That said, I still find myself wanting to compensate for that a little bit. But for the moment, I'm going to go ahead and kind of build in a block. And if I need to pare that back, I can do that. Can y'all see those lines? Those are a little bit lighter. Okay, so let me go a little darker there. This keyboard is at an angle. It has a large, about an inch thick chunk that's at an angle. What I'm going to do is start that chunk up at this top corner. It's actually going to be slightly angled here too, which I'll just fudge. I'll just draw a slight angle there. And I'm going to extend that forward to where it comes down and finishes more or less where that is. Is there foreshortening going on here? Yes, technically. I might even try to simulate that a little bit with a little bit wider area up front, but it's in a freehand sketch as imprecise as this, it's probably not going to show up. So I end up with something like that. Everybody see that? That was totally eyeballed, but it was eyeballed based on a box I had built that was about pretty close to the right proportion. So I had sighted off of this line, built that box, and it gives me kind of a basis for this, diagonal chunk that would be this keyboard side right here. Gives me a good starting point. I'm feeling fairly confident that that is pretty close to that in perspective. And I'll try to move this one up into that corner where you can kind of see it up there. So, and then I have this little detail that's stepped in, it's set in underneath here. Does not come out to this line, it actually steps in a little bit. And I'm going to sketch that in. Just, again, I'm eyeballing. I'm just literally sighting. I'm not doing anything more than that. And then this is slightly angled there. So I end up with kind of the base mass underneath there of the keyboard. I may have come back a little bit too far with that, but I'm going to leave it. And let's give myself back to that vanishing point, back to this vanishing point. Now you can see that keyboard is looking really kind of big, but it is physically closer to me than that computer is. So there's a little bit of that wouldn't be inaccurate. I'm going to also look at kind of the keys, the boundary of the keys. Look at how thick a boundary there is. There's like an inch and a half probably of distance between the outer edge and those keys, and really almost all the way around. So literally I'm just going to go in here, and on that diagonal face I'm going to start to sketch more or less in parallel to what that angle was, and just build a window, essentially it's like a hole, a cut hole that you're drawing in perspective for where those keys are going to punch through that housing. again, the boundary is what's important. Get the boundaries perspective right and proportions right, and volumes grow out of these boundaries. You can do that fairly easily. The keys themselves are fairly thick. Look at how much they stand off above the height of this keyboard. You know, they really, I mean, that's like 3/4 of an inch up above, and more or less straight up. There's kind of some tapering going on there and stuff, but more or less straight up. So let's draw it. Let's keep building the blocks. You'll notice I haven't put any details in here yet, just the building blocks. And let's build that block. Do not get into drawing each key. That is a time waster. Not needed, unnecessary. I will go ahead and cut out this notch because the first key on this row is actually cut out. You don't see it. That's only to replicate that kind of notch right there. So in fact, I went a little too far. Okay, keys are blocked in. I know where those are going to go. Let's go back to the computer. We'll save that mouse for last. One of the things that strikes me really right off the bat is the screen. You know, let's get the screen in here because this is fun. How much of that total face does the screen take up? Or better yet, how high off the ground does the baseline of that screen start, would you say? About midpoint, and it's really close to, it might be a hair below midpoint, but it's really close to being a midpoint. So, you know, you could do a diagonal across this face. You could do that off the original face, not the angled face. You could do a diagonal here if that helps you measure out. Let's do it. I'll do it so lightly that I just need to see it for this one construction, and then I am using the rectangle in this, or triangle in this case, and then at this point I'm just going to bring that line just a little bit below. Say that screen's going to be a little bit below that midpoint. Now I'm kind of projecting it over onto this angled face. The distance there is so minor it's not really going to matter that I'm not technically on that plane because it's almost on that plane. But technically that line is going to be somewhere in there. Go into that left vanishing point. I got thick margins. You know, no edge-to-edge screen here. That's a good inch. How wide is that? Probably, yeah, every bit an inch. Maybe an inch and a quarter width here totally to that screen. So I'm going to make sure I leave some good thick margins for that screen. And I'm going to follow literally that angled face straight up. Probably may not have given it enough of a margin there. Probably could have thinned that up a little more. And I'm just going to estimate the back side of it. But I know that it's going to be less, going to look less than this side, right? And the top. This goes off to that left vanishing point, same way. Something's not right there. I feel like there's a line that's off. Let me look at your screen. Yours gets enlarged easier. I can see, what is it? I'm not clear. I think it's that top line that I don't feel right about. This feels like this needs to open up just a little more, maybe. Not sure. I'll get back to that. Something's out of whack there. I'm going to thicken this a little bit because I feel like it's a little bit narrow. But I'm using these parallels to those lines and coming in here. Now I have a box now that's essentially on that plane that represents the general boundaries, but you'll notice this is chamfered, it's radius, there's a lot going on in here. I think what I'm going to do now, because of the deep setback that you have of the glass screen, this is a glass fish tank in here, set back so deep, and you'll notice it's kind of spherical a little bit. It's got a crown to it. It's actually not planar. The glass isn't. It's got a slight crown to it. I'm going to kind of exaggerate that just a little bit. You can see it actually there in the shading from the photograph. It has that kind of look. I'm going to come in here and say that that setback, I'm going to actually rotate and do a little arc. Set back in there a little bit. That kind of represents that crown a little bit. This actually shows up nicely because you can kind of tell it's got some roundness to it. So rotate your paper, and this is a case where your wrist arc will actually help you draw that because it's pretty easy to draw an arc of about that slight degree. And then I'm going to do the same thing coming up top and kind of bringing an arc over. Now in this case, it doesn't finish out. It's going to finish out a little bit deep where I don't totally see that inside. I'm going to rotate underneath and do the same thing again. This is freehand. I'm not measuring this, but it helps me define that screen-like shape inside that bezel. And it looks set back. It kind of naturally creates that setback because the corners are pushed back a little bit further. So that's good. I think that helps me kind of define that a little bit. I now need to really think about, well, let's get the disk drive in there first. Disk drive needs to go in there. How far over is the disk drive? Pretty much finishes on center, and it's pretty much right justified to the outer boundary of the screen, right? And it's pretty much halfway up the margin from the bottom. So that actually helps me. I can real quickly kind of draw a margin there, step out, come over here. The wide portion represents a smaller portion of it. Probably drew a little bit too much of the width there. And I'll put more darkness on that later, but that drive is there. Technically, the apple is over here, justified to the outside. I'll just draw a little ellipse there for the moment to show that it's over in that direction. Oh gosh, what else is there? The biggest thing that's left in terms of kind of defining this form, notice how cartoony it still looks because I have corners on it. We're about to take the corners off of this and put these chamfers on. And this is where it really makes a difference on this drawing. So look at what I've drawn here in black on this drawing right here. I actually laid these lines over the front face of this because they represent where that chamfer starts. This front face steps back at an angle at that second black line all the way around, and you'll see how shallow that chamfer is on the sides and how deep it is on the top and bottom. So take a look at that. This is a big detail. This is actually kind of what makes the drawing look real or fake right here. It's how we deal with and draw this chamfer. It's a big deal. A radius would be the same way if we were trying to put that radius on. The radiuses tend to be more quiet on this product. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to get up here and I'm going to try to recreate on this angled face essentially the boundary of that chamfer, right? So is there any kind of exact science to this? Well, I could, but I'm actually going to start on the bottom here because I have this nice clear line. And in this case, I actually am going to come back to my triangle just because I can. And I'm going to lightly put a slightly more exacting line there, but still light. That kind of gives me, okay, I'm going to say that that's my chamfer line. And I'm going to actually turn that radius just a little bit to go take that chamfer up. Now remember, the chamfer is removing material, so it's actually not, I'm actually not going to see that corner that I drew initially. I'm going to take that chamfer up. I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to use another radius and connect and go straight up. So I'm essentially kind of creating an offset, almost like an offset all the way around. And I'm going to turn this radius up here. Probably should have done a little deeper chamfer up top here. This comes across and ties back into this. So I essentially just boxed a new box, but I put radiuses on it. You'll notice these radiuses are actually portions of ellipses in perspective, but for the sake of time, I'm going to speed up and not necessarily show that. And these ellipses, this new boundary that's wrapping around this face, can y'all see that? I want to keep this light. because it's actually still not the edge that's on the outside, but it helps me create that edge. I'm now going to take down from this chamfer, I'm going to take a tangent line off of that chamfer that kind of represents how that edge is going to get lopped off, and it's going to come back to, but be slightly above that line right there. So this is kind of a critical line right now. I'm going to go ahead and start to darken it where you can see it. And this ends up kind of blowing up and being up in there. And this ends up rolling here and going up, and it gets trimmed back a little bit. So you have to trim back where we started that angled face. Get back to this in just a second. This is kind of tricky because you're removing, it's like you just took the corner off of this thing that you'd been designing it to this point, showing the corner, and then we take the corner off, which is kind of hard, but it's kind of the way it's working. And now up here, I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to show that chamfered cut by doing that tangential cut back. That's where it really shows off nicely, you can see, and that loops back to your original line there. This rolls around, and I'm going to have to find a line kind of in there that works, that goes back to there. I'm going to darken it a little more because I'm beginning to lose those lines in there. So it's a combination of using ellipses to give yourself rounds where you need rounds, but you also kind of have to start analyzing what form is doing. I think this is kind of the unseen skill of drawing, is understanding form. Do you understand what happens to geometry when you put a chamfered edge treatment on something and a radiused edge treatment on something? Do you understand what has to happen? It's not just being able to draw it, it's kind of understanding and seeing the form. So that now becomes a chamfered edge. Does that kind of make sense? That wraps around the front face. And I'm going to go ahead and hit this back line a little bit harder, because this line actually is going to be on the back side, and you'll notice I am coming in now with a triangle to give myself some confidence on that back line. I'm actually going to move this in. I ended up cutting off more than I wanted right here. This actually shouldn't be quite that far back, and it ends up, I'm going to pull that inside line in just a little more there to make a point. And I'll get more into my keyboard. I don't want to draw that bottom line there yet because my keyboard's going to interfere there. Let's go ahead. I know this back line is finished because it's a vertical and there's nothing really interfering with that. I'm going to go ahead and hit that one hard where I can see it. I'm going to go ahead and hit this chamfer here hard, the big chamfer, where I can see that. Nothing happening there. And boy, this handle is a trick because it's on this line that I can't see. I'm going to pull up to center line on that front face, draw myself a contour line, and take that contour line, really just split it right down the back side, the center line. I'm trying to get the center line of that back side where that handle is. And that handle takes up, you know, roughly half, but centered half width there. And I'm just going to give myself two tick marks along there to make sure I can hit those marks. And I'm eyeballing this, but I'm just bringing that handle up a little bit. It doesn't come too far up into the housing, but it does. It just makes it hard because it's so hard to see back there in that little thin sliver. But it's there, and it actually does show up. And if I turn that little lip down right there, it makes a difference. I can see it now. Ah, that makes a big difference, doesn't it? That little thin sliver done nicely in perspective on that top side. Go on and find center, do it right. I might even shadow it just a little bit to accentuate that it's there. Y'all see that? Boy, that's the kind of details that most people, if you're growing up drawing, learning to draw, that's the thing you won't draw, right? That's just, you just wouldn't, my kids wouldn't draw that top. They just, oh, it's just flat up there. Well, it's almost flat up there, but there, you can actually see just enough of it. And if you center that handle up in there, that makes a nice little detail to actually see. So I'm going to carry that chamfered theme all the way through this bezel here on the front too. So I'm going to go ahead and put some radiuses, some proper radiuses here on this bezel area, and try to tie this in a little bit more. Probably did make that bezel just a little bit too small, but going on and tying in these radiuses. The radius, the edge that's closest to me, I'm going to hit a little harder. One, because it's closest. You ever thought about lines being in perspective? That a line that's closer to you should be thicker than a line that's more distant from you? We hadn't even talked about that. That's another way to represent lines, is to think about lines diminishing in space. And I'm going to go ahead and add, just for clarity, a little bit, oh boy, I missed that one. A little bit more of these lines in here just to kind of make sure that they're working the right way. And there's rounds on this screen too that you can put in. Radiusing is best done after you get the base kind of started. I'm going to come back in here and add a few more details. This is just fun stuff at this point. Being able to come in and put some depth into the, I'm going to get away from my triangle here. When I have really short lines, I don't like using my triangle. It's actually better just to use them this way. And I'll do these little offsets that tend to replicate what a chamfered edge looks like. So this ends up looking kind of like it has depth. In fact, I'll even fake a little bit of slot depth in there that I'll come in and kind of shade in most of where you don't hardly see it, but tends to look like something is going on in there. There you go. Slot drive for the CD, or the, sorry, not CD, the 3.5 inch. And I'll do a little, just to have fun here with the apple, I'll put the little apple and a little mark there. All right. Okay. How are we doing? What time is it? We're at 43 minutes, which is at 2 o'clock. We're running a little behind. Okay. Now, keyboard and mouse. I don't want to go too much further. I can go ahead and put, I will go ahead and put a little round. It's nice to use rounds and cutbacks and knockoffs on the corner to kind of make these corners look like corners. It's just a little trick. The amount of slop that you have in a Prismacolor or whiteboard marker is actually one of the tricks to the keys to the trade here. So you can come in and hit a little bit harder lines and kind of fudge, darken up things where needed. Boy, I really messed that front corner up there. Now I'm going to come on in and darken my keyboard. My keyboard steps just in front of, barely in front of. I also have part line here. Look, this is a nice detail to put in here. Look at how the top and bottom parts of that housing have two parts, right? There's a split right there. That's a really nice detail to put into a drawing, and I'm beginning to get to a point here where it would be nice to have a little more tip. So I am going to switch over here and put in with a triangle here a real light double line. In fact, so light it almost doesn't look like a double line. And I'm going to interrupt, this is a sketch technique, just interrupt that rear line of the keyboard to make it look like there's a part break there. The truth is that's pretty sloppy. I hadn't really gotten real tight with it, but just that little interruption makes it look like there's two pieces there. See how I put a little V in there? And then I come in here and I'm going to round out the corners just a little bit to give me something there. Right here I'm going to go ahead and round that front corner. So I'm actually starting with the corner before I draw my line and come back with the triangle and hit that line a little harder and then hit the ground line on the front of the keyboard a little harder. Wrap the parts split right there and strike a couple right off there. Kind of messed that up. And I got to come back with a chamfer, which I haven't done here yet either. Let's go to the keyboard. The keys step up just a hair at or just above the back of that. I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm not going to draw those keys, but I'm going to put a few interruptions in here that kind of look like, oh, there's a key there and there. And I don't have to draw them all, but I just kind of put some of that detail in there so it kind of makes it look like there's something going on. And then I'll hit these a little bit harder too. Same thing, do an interruption about halfway up there and there. And that's enough. It's probably enough for a keyboard. Kind of looks like a keyboard. Maybe a couple of these longitudinals in there. That's enough. Don't get crazy with the keyboard. It'll take you all day and you don't get anywhere with it. It's not gonna make or break you. All right. I will, however, go ahead and put a chamfer on here that needs to be on this keyboard just like it needed to be on that front bezel face. So I'm gonna draw that and wrap it, roll that corner there. This kind of stays like a little bit darker than a construction line. It's actually kind of a contour line. Just to knock the corner off. And I actually drew a little bit too dark too quickly here. I should have lopped this corner off more right there to show this, but kind of missed my opportunity there. I'll mess that up. Might do some shading to hide that mistake. All right, I might put a little feet on here just to kind of show that it's off the ground. Sometimes that's a nice detail. Again, something most people wouldn't think to put in there, but it kind of adds a little detail. And same thing here on the rear of that keyboard has a little of that. And then I might even go on and shade that bottom part of the keyboard, which is recessed, mainly shading that because it would be in shadow. It would be darker, right? And okay, what else? What else do I need to do? The mouse is the big glaring thing. Oh man, I forgot. I have this beautiful offset part split here. I didn't even do that on the first class. I forgot all about it. Beautiful parts offset that really that whole face is a plastic piece melded to it. It's a fairly easy thing to do because it essentially follows the lines I already have. Starting out here, cutting out an angle, putting a radius on it, and then this ends up being a very slight radius that goes here. And then because I've used so many straight edge lines already on that, I am going to go ahead and use another straight edge line up to there, roll that over that radius, over the top, and it actually cuts across the top too, but you don't really see it much up there. And so I'm going to drive that back down. Technically, if you were trying to fake it here a little bit with the pencil, but pen, you would use a double line right here. I'm trying to kind of show this as a double line because technically those two parts are coming together. There you go. And technically the forward line of that is a little bit darker than the rear line, but that's getting splitting hairs. Okay, I got vents on the side here, but I didn't even get to the vents, but I'm gonna just do a box that represents those vents, and they come up about right there and right there. And that's it. That's all I'm going to do there because we need to get the mouse in and get done with this. The mouse we're going to do at a different perspective. And so, or I should say a different vanishing point. It's at an angle. So I'm actually going to just start a point. This is up to me where that first line is. But I know it's going to go out to this same horizon line, which is just off my paper to the north of the paper here. Goes off north somewhere. I'm going to draw that whole line out there. Y'all see where I'm going? And then I know that the opposite vanishing point, this is going to be the footprint of the mouse laying on that. This is going to be shooting off real shallow this direction. Just how shallow, I don't know. Actually, really shallow. Sorry. There you go. Draw a mouse. You don't actually need to see mine, actually. Draw your mouse. It's right there. Draw your mouse with a different set of vanishing points than the rest of the computer, but sharing the horizon line, just like the books. This is no different than the stacked books. Stacked books work the same way. So it's sitting on that surface. You saw it. The first line you strike can be anywhere. Actually, you're kind of dictating the angle it sits at. So you can kind of strike that first line anywhere you want. And then you can see I was starting to lay mine in here. And I was probably going to end up with something that was kind of facing the computer. So the mouse in this case is almost facing me. Almost like a one-point perspective. Not quite. But it's probably would have had a divergence or convergence something like this, because the vanishing point is just a little bit above the paper here, so I'm kind of sighting up a little bit above there. And if that's one line going to that vanishing point, this other one's probably somewhere in here, maybe, probably somewhere in that neighborhood. And this becomes the footprint of where that mouse is going to be, and I can then sight way off. This one's going to go, that vanishing line is going to be way out in space because this is tilted. And if doing something like that, and of course my mouse is about to go off page too. I'm kind of running out of space here, but I would extend the thickness upward. Yours may be different. Yours should be different. Your viewpoint's different. Draw it. Draw it. You'll notice I left the hardest part off, so I didn't want to screw up the mouse. But I did it here. There you go. Thick mouse. It's a thick, chunky cigarette box. It's like cigarettes. It's like a box of cigarettes. That's how thick that mouse is. They still sell cigarettes in those kind of boxes. Yes?
Please try to put it up there, because I really can't see the mouse.
Okay, here it is. Draw a mouse. You remember how I said the first 20 minutes you need to be looking at this?
No.
Last 20 minutes you need to be looking at your paper. You get the mouse.
Yes.
I want you to draw your drawing, not my drawing. It's really important. Especially the last 20 minutes, it needs to be your drawing. This is what's so important.
Hey, Shay, would you
Yes.
throw the picture of the top of the computer up there?
Yeah. That's a good idea. I'll show you the pictures of the computer. I think this is really important to break that cycle of I got to draw it just like Shay's. You draw it from whatever viewpoint you have and you make it right to that viewpoint. That's really important. And nothing more important than the mouse, because it's going to be dependent on whatever your system has been before. I told you this first drawing I did the horizon line right through the screen. You know, the second one I did that I was drawing with you, we drew slightly more down, and I think that's actually a better way to draw it, is slightly more down on it rather than the architectural view. But whichever way you drew it, draw it right to itself. I think that's the big thing. Try to draw it correct to your perspective system, and start looking at your drawing and making your drawing right. Y'all have questions, or y'all just? If y'all have thoughts on this, y'all all had to draw all these too, so. Yeah, I know. Is Jared working on the cubes? Yes. Okay. Yeah, I finish in here at 3, and then I'm totally great the rest of the day, so. Thank you. And you need to wrap this up in 5 minutes. Because we got one more to do before 3. We'll go real fast with it. Yes?
So you're a regular driver?
This was the one I started with you guys. I don't know which one I like better. There's aspects, I think I actually like my first drawing better today. Sometimes the first time you do it, it's better than trying to over practice it and overwork it. I don't like this small paper. Small paper's hurting me. This drawing to me should be on a slightly larger piece of paper, but so I'm feeling constricted. Let me see your drawing. Get your drawing out. What? My drawing doesn't matter. No. You do your drawing.
I can't see the screen from over here.
Look at the computer.
I can't see the computer from over here either.
Well, come up front. It's right here in front of you. It's called a Macintosh. It's all over the web. It's amazing. They've had them for 30 years now. It's all over the web. Go look at one. Yes.
Where's the mouse?
It's up there. Fella's barring it. He can't see real well.
I see. Since I don't know what the mouse looks like.
Yeah, it's an Apple Macintosh, the original one. I'm not trying to be mean, folks, but you need to be on your drawing, and should have been 15 minutes ago, not on my drawing. I'm trying to show you an approach to go about constructing, but this is 100% about you making your drawing right. And you need to study this thing. I feel like y'all are studying my drawing, and you're not studying this. This is the problem in here. It's like, if I could make you throw your phones away and stare at this for an hour and a half without leaving your seat, and that would be good. That would actually help, I think. But unfortunately, we can't do that with 82 people. It just doesn't work that way. So this is the best we can do to show you pictures, bring one in here, try to analyze it. That's probably what I should do, is not draw and just talk about analyzing this in front of you and let y'all draw. That's probably a good approach. But you all know how to lay out a cube now. Works the same way. We got another one to do, so we need to move on. 2 more minutes. Wrap it up, speed it up, make it happen. Side view. Where's the side view? Here's the side view. There is a big difference, folks. This is the struggle. Jared has struggled with it. I've struggled with it. Randy struggled with it. The struggle is you guys drawing a drawing instead of you guys drawing an object. Those are 2 different things. And unfortunately, a lot of our assignments are set up where you're looking at a drawing all day. You're trying to replicate a drawing all day. And that's, you know how much sense that makes? That makes no sense. Because when you design something, you're not looking at a drawing to make something. You're designing something from scratch. You have to design and sketch something out of space, right, that doesn't exist. And so this is just the challenge of teaching this class, is to get those training wheels off and get you comfortable fixing your own drawing. Yes?
I was just gonna ask you, so do you expect like our cities and all the classes we made to be better because we're actually
The
just kind of
cities
designing-
and glasses that you made, expect them to be better.
because we're just completely designing them ourselves rather than
Well, I don't know about designing them yourselves, but the idea that you're correcting your drawing to what you've generated. I think that's the key thing, is that you're really focused on making your drawing right more than you're focused on replicating another person's drawing. I mean, that's what we're trying to break the chain of here. All right, so let's switch. Next one. Next up, got to change gears, go to one more here. And this one's harder to see, so this will be even better to bring the training wheels off. It's a smaller object, much smaller. And I'll turn the lights up briefly. I'll have to analyze later which of those two versions I like better. I'm not sure yet, but bring the lights up briefly and we'll look at this. First, let's spend some time looking. Let's spend some time looking.